Karen's in the kitchen when she hears the doorbell. She freezes. When it rings again, she still doesn't move. She can hear Tom stirring upstairs. He's probably wondering why she's not getting up. When it rings a third time, she reluctantly leaves the kitchen to answer it. Her eyes meet Tom's as he's coming down the stairs. He stops halfway down. She can sense the uneasiness radiating off of him. She feels an uneasiness of her own as she opens the door. It's Detective Rasbach and his sidekick, the other detective, whose name she can't remember. Her mouth has gone dry. She tells herself to be calm. She reminds herself that she has a lawyer. She remembers his card in her wallet. She can reach him if she has to. Karen wants to slam the door in the detective's face. "May we come in, Mrs. Rasbach asks politely. She sees him flick a glance toward her husband, who's still standing like a sentry on the stairs. She thinks about it. She has only a second or two to make the right decision. Calvin has told her not to talk to the police, but she's afraid that if she sends them away, they will come back with an arrest warrant. She hears Tom walk down the rest of the stairs and comes up behind her. "What do you want?" he says to the detective a little aggressively. "I'd rather not do this on the doorstep," Rasbach asks pleasantly. Karen pulls the door open wide and allows the two detectives to enter the house, avoiding Tom's eye. They end up in the living room like before. "Please sit down," Karen says. She steals a glance at Tom now and is alarmed by what she sees written on his face. He doesn't know how to dissemble, and right now he looks like he's expecting his world to end. There's a pregnant silence before anyone speaks. Rasbach takes his time. She can't let it get to her. She waits him out. At last, Rasbach begins. "Have you remembered anything about the evening of your accident?" he asks Karen. "No," she says politely. After a pause, she adds, "Apparently, that's not unusual in these kind of cases." And then she thinks that perhaps she shouldn't have said that. Sounds like she's read it out of a book. "I see," the detective says mildly. "Can I ask, just out of curiosity, what efforts are you making to regain your memory?" "Pardon me?" Karen asks at the unexpected question. She shifts in her seat. "It seems to me that if you couldn't remember what happened that night, you'd be making some attempt to do something about it," Rasbach says. "Like what?" she says. She crosses her arms. "I can't just take a pill, get my memory back." "Are you seeing anyone about it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't think it will help. My memory will come back in its own good time." "That's what you believe." "That's what my doctor said." She knows she sounds defensive. She takes a deep, quiet breath. The truth is, she hasn't dared to see a specialist such as a hypnotist because she can't risk anyone else hearing what might have happened that night. She needs to uncover this on her own. He changes tact. "We know that you left the house alone the night of the accident. We have witnesses who saw you leave the house." "Okay," she says. She feels Tom glance sharply at her. Rasbach says, "We also know that you received a phone call that night at about 17 p.m. At 8:17 p.m. "Did I?" she says. "Yes, you did, on your landline. We've looked at your phone records," Rasbach says. "Are you allowed to do that?" Tom asks. "Yes, we are," Rasbach says, "or we wouldn't have done it. We got a subpoena." He turns his attention back to her. Who do you think might have called you at that time?" "I have no idea." "No idea," Rasbach repeats. Tom blurts out, as if he can't stand the tension any longer. "You obviously know who called her, so why don't you stop playing games and tell us?" Rasbach glances at her husband. "We don't actually know who called," he says. "The call is made from a disposable cell phone. We can't trace that kind of call." Then Roswatch leans forward in his chair toward her, a little ominously, she thinks. But I imagine you know that. Karen feels the eyes of the two detectives and her husband on her at this new information. Her heart is beating double time now. That's a bit out of the ordinary, Rosbach continues, don't you think? She thinks about the card in her wallet. It was a mistake to let them in. Interesting that the call came on the home line rather than on your cell, the detective says. She stares at him but says nothing. What can she possibly say? Perhaps the call wasn't meant for you at all, Rosbach says. This suggestion surprises her. Rosbach turns back to Tom, who looks as confused by this as she is. What do you mean? Tom asks. Rosbach says, I mean maybe the call was for you and she took it instead. What? Tom asks, obviously taken aback. The call came at 8:17. Aren't you usually home by that time? The detective asks. Karen watches Rosbach, relieved to have their focus shift away from her, and who called her from that burner phone, if even for a moment. Let them waste their time on Tom, she thinks. They won't find anything there. She feels herself start to relax just a little bit. They obviously don't really know anything. They're fishing. They'll be leaving soon with nothing more than what they came with. Yeah, I'm usually home by 8 or earlier, but I've been very busy at work lately, Tom says defensively. The detective waits. Why, you think that someone called me from an untraceable cell phone? It's possible, Rosbach says. That's ridiculous, Tom protests. When Rosbach remains silent, simply watching him with his sharp blue eyes, Tom says, You think someone called me from an untraceable cell phone and my wife took the call and ran out of the house? Why should she do that? Karen watches Tom and Rosbach, surprised at where this is going. Yeah, why? Rosbach asks and waits quietly. Tom loses patience. Detectives, I'm afraid you're wasting your time, not to mention ours. Maybe you should go. Have you got something to hide, Mr. Krupp? Rosbach asks, as if he already knows the answer. Karen swivels her startled eyes to her husband's face. Bridget hesitates on her own doorstep, brownies in hand, when she sees the car on the street in front of the Krupp's house. She knows that car. Those two detectives are there again. Bridget is dying to know what's going on. She decides to slip around to the back of the house and leave the brownies just inside the back door. She doesn't want to bother anybody. It's a hot night, and as she hoped, the sliding glass doors are open to let in the breeze. Only the screen door is closed. If she stands very still in the dark, she may be able to hear what they're saying in the living room, especially if she quietly opens the door to set the brownies down, maybe just inside on the kitchen